Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Hmm.
Um, there's always an uncanny number of ways to begin a conversation like this one. And though, of course, try to prepare some things in my mind before this kind of conversation, um, I also dutifully let them go. So rather than being, preemptive, or presume I have some kind of message to share with you, which I really don't. Uh, our time together is, you could say, spontaneous, as arguably all things always are. This spontaneity, the uncharted territory of whatever presence might be, has a nourishing and immersive quality. It's profoundly inviting. One could say that what we refer to as the conceiving mind, the narrative mind, is has a possessive tendency, both a claiming and a possessive tendency, which interferes, if you will, with a unprecedented immersive invitation. Our tendency is to process what we imagine is happening or has happened or may happen, and then make that imagination, that abstraction, have to do something with ourselves. So we become circumstantially dependent upon the presence of the narrative mind, and we mistake that loyalty for reality. So the human being, if there are any, tends to live in a realm of near absolute abstraction and self-reference, which of course is accompanied by entitlement and self-importance and codependency and specialness. So you see, we meet the unprecedented nature of presence with a quite thick or gooey preemptive anticipatory consciousness. And we also objectify everything nearly instantaneously. And by objectifying the presence of experience through the narrative mind, you can say we create the hallucination of self. And we therefore become object dependent. And if I refer to myself as the subject, I also become subject dependent. And so the vagaries and the vicissitudes of the world that I have imagined becomes my prison cell. What this kind of conversation is about is a quite radical, if not alchemical, departure from our nearly unconscious reliance on the narrative mind to suggest the presence of reality. Before the thought movement kicks in to create context and content, there is, may I say, felt sense. And that's the emphasis, if you will, of these kinds of conversations, is uh, the welcoming, the noticing of felt sense. When we're not speaking about emotion, though emotion can be present within the plenum of felt sense, we're not necessarily talking about thinking and thoughts, but those are also present within the plenum or the canvas of felt sense. Even what we may refer to as physical sensation, occurs right within the canvas, within the womb of felt sense. So a recalibration of whatever awareness might be is simply to notice the uncanny, ineffable, and irrefutable nature of felt sense. In other words, we simply feel what it feels like to feel this. The nature and quality of awareness, which is not an object and doesn't belong to you, is capable of tuning its attentivity simply to the unadorned, unqualified nature of presence, the unadorned and unqualified nature of presence itself. This quality of sensitivity or intelligence does not have a story to tell, not about my prior experience, not about the anticipation of so-called future experience. And if you become casually familiar with it, you may also notice that you're not even concerned with what you might refer to as your present experience. There is no longer any bridge or reliance upon or engagement with the narrative mind to give you any information about anything. And this is an effortless movement. It doesn't require any preparation or vow or renunciation or spiritual practice. It's not concerned with the presence of religion or science or spirit of any kind. It is absolutely unadorned. Nothing can contain it. That's the nature of a, may I say, a companion intelligence. So as one may be interested, curiously motivated, perhaps court-ordered, metaphorically speaking, to learn something about, to investigate the nature of felt sense, there's an organic deepening that occurs, which is non-referential, meaning there is no pointing back to the way you feel or what you think or what you believe in, or whether there is the presence or absence of free will or choice. You see, the entirety of what we can refer to as human narrative consciousness is gone. I mean, radically, perhaps terrifyingly, perhaps liberatingly gone. And that relief and release from experiential momentum is always present. Relief and release from the assertion, from the presumption, from the imposition of consciousness itself is always present. One must be sufficiently adventurous to discover what it might feel like to wean oneself from any dependency upon self-referential narrative consciousness at all. Who would you be without self-reference? without the pride of my opinion, or the pride of my conviction, or the pride of my superstition, the pride of my belief. Who and what would you be if you were no longer secondhand? And by that, I mean, you're not defining yourself according to belief, superstition, a prayer, anticipation, gratitude. I'm not dismissing these things, of course, but I'm inviting you to consider what this would feel like if you were free from, pardon me, the myth of yourself. And here that invitation is, as it always is. You have the capacity to discover a companion intelligence which is not dependent upon thinking, thought, opinion, sentiment, or sensation. And you're in luck. Here you are. Here this is. I don't know a thing about it. Nothing. I don't know anything about this. I'm not relying on the physicists or the founders of great religions or ascended masters or living or dead persons to give me any information at all. There is no authority. Nobody knows what this is. Nobody ever has. No one can. Which radical appreciation can relieve you of any reliance on any authority figure whatsoever. Most importantly, yourself. There is a certain kind of autonomy, a certain quality of dignity, which is present because you are no longer second hand. You're not relying on anything that anyone has said ever to define you, to ingratiate you, to coerce you, to shame you, or to even lift you up. You see, this is not a behavioral or attitudinal orientation. And we are so commonly cooperate, right, with behavioral and attitudinal adjustments. If only I felt this way or felt that way, or if I could add a little more optimism or perhaps a little more gratitude to replace my rage or my, revengeful disdain of whatever may or may not be occurring. You see, so this loop of self-reference gets us engaged, engorged with the myth of ourselves. And we never get any relief from it, from us, from me, from I. But what if you, with no effort on your part, possessed a radical and discontinuous intelligence that had absolutely no interest in anything that you think and no interest in anything that you feel? And here it is. This is that. This is whatever this is. But not asserting anything, not creating claim, possession, context, continuity, or outcome. You are completely free, effortlessly free of the nature of mind, the nature of reference, of knowledge, here, with, again, no effort on your part, you discover a sacred incompetency. You don't need to lift a finger to do anything about yourself or about your imagination of the world. Absolute autonomy has everything to do with you and nothing to do with you. The mind makes it appear as if it's an intermediary, your best friend, your most intimate companion, your pal forever. But the mind is seducing and soliciting the presence of awareness, the presence of attention, to tell you a story, to give you false information, to make it appear as if your experience is evidentiary. Experience is not evidentiary. You can't find anything within the presence of experience, with the exception of that which you narrate. And if you take a break, whether it's 2 or 3 seconds, or perhaps a little longer or shorter than that, you can notice for yourself, and not just because I'm blabbering on about it, but you can notice for yourself that you cannot find anything except by which you narrate. You just don't know what this is. Nobody does. Nobody can. There is no affliction in presence. Affliction is the byproduct of pride, pride of self, pride of entitlement. Commonly, and I've been doing this for long enough to have some sense of it, commonly we may respond to the joyous blasphemy that I'm expressing by trying to interpret it through familiar means. In other words, you hear a conversation or some words, they may be pleasing to you, they may be displeasing to you, they may be radical, they may be, well, everybody knows that. But you're processing present impression field through the familiarity of yourself. You see? And this reflex to process the impression field through the familiarity you have with yourself and with your own mind appears to sustain, right, what we might call, ego or identification. And that processing is, you could say, very aggressive, very assertive. It's not easy to relieve yourself from the reflex to process impressions through, right, the inertial familiarity that you have with your own consciousness. So we're speaking about, which is not so easy to do, a effortless and spontaneous departure, decoupling from acquisitive consciousness. You see, you're not here to acquire anything, to believe anything, to make sense of anything, to change the course of your attitude or life. That's all beneath you. You see, actual awareness is unadorned. It has no dependency. It's not concerned with what may have occurred before now. It's certainly not concerned with what may happen in a so-called future, which nobody actually has. Nobody's ever had a future. There's just whatever this is right about now. And if you get good at this, if that becomes your curious fate, then you notice that now is not such a big deal either. There is no now. All there is now, but there is none. You can't find it. You see, with the collapse of the narrative reflex, when you're not telling yourself a story about anything, when you're not projecting the image of yourself in time, space, whatever those may be, there is neither past nor future, and I must apologize, there's no now either. So it's not even worth your effort to attempt to be here now, because you can't. You see, awareness is unoccupiable. But as the creature, as the human, as the prideful owner of space-time and body, we think we occupy, right, the so-called living realm, bookended between birth and death. And then we have however many years we have to amass as many opinions about everything that we possibly can. And I'm not going to dissuade you from that perspective, right? It's a lovely and practical perspective. Perhaps humans will go extinct, perhaps not. You can get a sense of that for yourself based on the curious vicissitudes and challenges facing the entire species these days. But it is not necessarily a concern of yours, because awareness is not limited to the surface of Earth. It's not limited to space, time, body, feeling, mind, history, efficacy. It's just not. Presence is not occupiable. It has no evidence. All of the, let's say, celebrations and dilemmas that may be human-based are made up. It's abstraction. It's a fantasy. And that doesn't mean to say that fantasy is bad or good. It's just that you do have a companion intelligence to notice the elaborate ruse of the presumption of individuated consciousness. You can do it. You have to be, let's just say, curiously motivated. You have to be invited. You have to respond to the invitation and to the appointment for this alchemy to occur. And it can be turbulent. Yes? We don't really appreciate the verve and the momentum and the insistence that we place upon the presumption of self until it's challenged, until you scratch at the surface to find out whether it's true or not true. If you do, if ever you do. Otherwise, we float along, right, from cradle to grave, presuming that the mind is our pal, that the mind is the conveyor of reality, that we can rely upon it to tell us what this is, to know how to function or to thrive. It's not your best choice. Here this is, whatever it is. Nobody knows what it is, and nobody can. You don't have to take dictation from anything, from anyone.